So from the magical herb, the gift from God that Susannah believes she's still here, Dr. Katalaris, can you explain more on the medicinal plane? How does cannabis oil actually work? Or how does
it works at so many different levels, right? I mean, we've already heard about the mental effect, right? And mood elevating, a degree of insight, and a whole lot of things which are very, very important to a person addressing the major lifestyle change, which is what a cancer diagnosis forces on people. From an actual anti-tumour effect, right? Cannabis, and when we talk about cannabis, remember we're dealing with a very heterogeneous, like a varied group of plants, and each have got different ratios of the different cannabinoids. Right, some are relatively higher in THC, some have more CBD, and a whole range of other minor.
So a cannabinoid is an element?
Okay, look, I'll start from the beginning because this will help all the terminology. The smelly parts of cannabis, the things you can smell, are called terpenes, right? Terpenes are made up of 18 carbon molecules that give cannabis its distinctive smell, but when we analyse them, it's actually a combination of terpenes that are found in the rest of nature. So the smelly bit in a lemon, or in an orange, or in a pine tree, or in lemongrass, they're all found in different, or a mango, they're all found in different quantities in the cannabis, and its particular characteristic is defined by the ratio of those terpenes. It's highly likely that those terpenes modulate what they're calling the entourage effect, modulates the effect of the cannabinoids. So there's two different movements going on, three things: the quantity of the cannabinoids, the ratio of the cannabinoids, and the moderating effect of the terpenes. So all those things are different, right? But we'll just talk in general terms how it helps cancer. Everyone's heard now the word apoptosis. Apoptosis is a unique form of cell death that doesn't involve necrosis or death. What it does, it's more like an active suicide of the cell. So under the influence of cannabinoids and other things, other nutritional things can induce apoptosis, there's no doubt about that. You have a selective deletion of cancer cells, but not normal cells. So if you put normal cells and cancer cells in a test tube and give them a chemotherapeutic agent, they'll all be affected. Any cell that's dividing will be affected, and they'll be affected by necrosis. That's a process where the cells swell up and burst, basically. It's like a messy death. Apoptosis, when you actually look under a microscope at the cells, cancer cells and normal breast cells in the tubes exposed to cannabis, you'll have a selective deletion of the cancer cells by this process of apoptosis, where there's a plug pulled in the membrane and it actually pumps out its cell fluid. It's a very pretty process. And in fact, I studied apoptosis in the 1990s as part of my MD thesis, even before we knew of the effect that cannabis had. So it was a very interesting synergy for me.
So do the cancer cells basically self-implode?
Yes, basically, and then their fragments are sort of recycled. So it's a very neat process.
Recycled and flushed out?
Well, a dead cancer cell broken to pieces is not a cancer cell. I mean, there's nothing poisonous about it, you know, once it's been hydrolyzed, right? So it's not like it's a toxin by itself, it's just more cell fragments, right? So you've got the apoptosis. There's a variation on that called autophagy, which is another form of natural selective cell death amongst cancer cells. But the other two effects that the cannabis has is, firstly, it increases what they call the intracellular adhesion. So that means your normal cells, what's the word? Close up, right? The cells hold together at these adhesion points, and if they're tight, there's simply no room for metastases to push their way in, right? So they give them the cold shoulder. That's increased cell adhesion, and there's a reduction in the capacity of tumours to form new blood vessels, angiogenesis. That's a really critical thing, because a lot of the allopathic medicines are aimed at the capacity of tumours to induce or cause the growth of blood vessels, because without the blood vessels, the tumour can't grow much bigger than sort of like a marble size. So it has to induce these blood vessels. If you can stop that process, you can limit the size of the tumour, and in the extreme form, even remove it altogether. Okay.
In your experience, have you seen that complete removal of tumours?
The very first patient I treated with a Rick Simpson type oil was in a terrible situation. This was a lady with breast cancer who'd gone through the mill for 12 years, and now the cancer had actually returned locally at the original site and infiltrated into her brachial plexus. Right? It was a horrible presentation with intolerable pain of the neuropathic electrical sort of pain, paralysis of the arm, right? And the situation looked really grim. She was basically sent home to die. Right? The hospital said, no, we've done all we're doing. I gave her the Rick Simpson oil. At this stage, there wasn't much knowledge about it, and my main reason for preparing and giving to her was to reduce her pain. Right? I mean, I hoped it might help, but it was mostly intended to help with the neuropathic pain, because cannabis is well known to affect neuropathic pain, which doesn't respond very well to the opiates. Right? To my great pleasure, in 4 weeks, the pain stopped, or over a period of 4 weeks, the pain stopped, and now the function of her arms returned. I was delighted, to say the least. Unfortunately, those dramatic responses haven't been duplicated in many patients since. We haven't worked out what specific factor, either in the herb itself, or in the person, or in the disease, that makes some respond so dramatically. Right? It's not a panacea at this stage. Everyone doesn't respond. And there's a certain point in a tumour evolution when just the load of tumour overwhelms the person. Right? I mean, they do overwhelm the person, right? So if we start treatment too late, there's very little chance of success, right?
So what you're saying is there's so many elements that are taken into consideration, and variables with both the treatment and what is happening for the person, the illness itself, their environment that they're in, their history, their, the holistic aspect of it.
The problem is, right, and I mean, we try and keep a balance on this. So in summary, some people are responding dramatically. There's no doubt about that. Some of the brain cancer responses, the breast and the prostate cancer responses have been dramatic. There's a couple of pretty credible reports of liver cancer responding fairly dramatically. But it's different across the board, and what other people do as well.
So for people who are listening to this who sort of still believe that cannabis is around getting stoned or that recreational aspect of it, what you're presenting here is a completely different view of how this plant is actually healing and assisting people.
You know what offends me massively? And that's the word recreational drug use as a pejorative term. I mean, drugs properly used are recreational. I mean, that's why we have intelligent use of psychedelics and intelligent use of cannabis for recreational purposes. Why that's a term of criticism, I really can't understand. All right, that's the first thing. Okay, but there's much more to it than that. I think Susannah said it was a magical healing plant. It's not only magical healing with an individual, but also at a planetary level. I mean, the industrial applications, both the hemp seed for food, the fibre, the earth care, the ability to do without the herbicides and the pesticides, the ability to increase following crops by the mere presence of cannabis the season before, all these things give us a capacity for actually remaking the world.
Which basically brings everything back into the whole biodiverse aspect. We're not a sole single unit that operates, without being connected to everything else. And so, as you're saying, the cannabis is around the person, the environment. It has so many applications and so many components of it. But I just want to go back to Susannah and just ask, where are you at now? What's happening now for you in relation to your health?